All right. And welcome back to the First and Goal podcast. My name is Lewis, and next to me is my beautiful co host, Laraib, as we are going to recap a great week two slate of games. We're going to get into our picks, some overreactions, some hope for winless teams, and maybe some panic for winless teams. So before we get into that, Laraib, you want to say anything about things we're doing?
Yeah, once again, we're on Spotify. Check us out on there, as well as the rest of our socials. But that being said, Lewis, how about we move into our picks for the weeks for this week?
Gladly. Gladly.
I know you're going to be really happy about this week's outcome. I went with the Chargers as my upset of the week, and the Chiefs came back and won that one. And of course, your upset of the week, Arizona Cardinals, had that crazy finish
Let's
in
go.
overtime.
Let's
And so, that
go.
was really the difference. I think this is one of the few weeks that we're going to have all season long where both of our locks lose. But what do you have to say about these games, Lewis?
It was certainly a wild week. Week two is always the you're too smart for your own good. Week one team has a really good performance, kind of like the Ravens, and you overvalue them a little bit too much. And then a team has a bad performance in week one, and they come back and show out like the Lions in week two. So there were a lot of really good games as a result of this. A lot of upsets that we did not expect. So yeah, both our locks lost, and honestly, both our upsets had a really good chance of winning, and both came down to the wire. If not for a Justin Herbert pick six, yikes! But we'll get in. We'll touch on that a little bit. But overall, and then obviously we're filming this before the two Monday night games this week, so we will not touch on that. But as you can see, but if you're listening on Spotify, we both picked Buffalo to beat Tennessee, and I picked Philly. Laraib picked Minnesota, but those will not have an outcome on the week because I handily won this week. Thank you, Detroit. Thank you,
Uh,
Arizona.
Carson Wentz, never again, never again.
And then don't pick Geno Smith ever again. All right. But let's move into our first topic, Laraib. So there are a lot of teams, and there's a stat that's been kind of thrown around this weekend of 0-2 teams or winless teams going into week three have not made the playoffs in the last two seasons. So this year, there are six such teams. We're filming this before the Titans are playing on Monday night. They're playing the Bills, so they might remain winless or they might pull off an upset. We're not going to hit on them in this segment, but there's six teams who are currently winless. Now, three of these teams, we don't really expect them to do much this season. Now that they can do something, they can surprise the world. The Texans, Panthers, and Falcons have not won a game, but we don't really expect much of them, so it's not a surprise that they have not won a game yet. However, there are three teams that we did have expectations for, and the Raiders, the Colts, and the Bengals, who have not won a game yet, Rob. So out of these three teams, on a panic meter, from one being the least panicked, you still have faith in this team, they'll figure it out, to a 10 being the most panicked, high alert, which of these three teams gives you the most panic?
I think it's going to be the Las Vegas Raiders, Lewis. Like you're saying, all these teams internally, these teams should be thinking to themselves that they're on a 10 for their panic meter because, like you said, 0-2 teams are not making the playoffs in the past couple seasons. But for this Raiders team, I think they really had a disappointing outing this past weekend. You're up 20-0 against the Cardinals halfway through the third quarter, and you just completely choke it. Devontae Adams was a no-show. The whole game, and we saw how their defense was exploited last week by Patrick Mahomes. And I know exactly that, Derek Carr isn't exactly Patrick Mahomes, but still, this Cardinals defense really isn't that good, besides JJ Watt. And so for this Raiders offense to not put up any points in the second half of that game was really disappointing, Lewis.
Yeah, I agree. Out of the three teams, this is also the team that I feel the most panicked about just because of the situation. You lose to a divisional opponent against the Chargers in week one, and it was a tough game. It was a close game. You honestly had a case to win the game if it wasn't for Derek Carr's turnovers. And in week two, you utterly choked a game. The reason I'm the most concerned is just the lifelessness and the kind of scratching your head moments from this team. And Josh McDaniels, who was very valued as an offensive coordinator, but as a head coach has not proven enough to have faith in him to turn a program around or to have those kind of connections to build a broken team up. And that's my concern. However, I do think they have the requisite talent to still be a competitive team, but it's just the division that they're in out of all these three teams is by far the toughest division. And not saying they can't make the playoffs if they don't win the division, because I don't think they will at this point, but it's definitely going to be an uphill climb. And like you said, the second hardest schedule going forward into the rest of the NFL season. So we'll see how they fare. Let's see if they can come back. I expect Devontae Adams to get more than 2 catches in an NFL game. But I got to say, honestly, the team I'm most frightened for, just in terms of having success at all, is the Indianapolis Colts. I just think from what I've seen from this offense has been putrid. In week 1, you have 0 points at halftime against the Texans, and you have to claw your way back to tie in overtime against probably the worst team in the NFL. And then you follow that up against the Jaguars at Jacksonville. Yes, they're House of Horrors for some reason, and you get shut out against a divisional opponent. So you haven't won a game against 2 divisional opponents, arguably 2 of the lesser teams in the NFL. We'll see what happens with the Jaguars. They've looked pretty frisky in their first 2 games. But it's just, are we sure Frank Reich is the answer in Indianapolis? I understand. He's had 5 different quarterbacks in the 5 years he's been there starting for him. He thought he'd have Andrew Luck, and then Andrew Luck retires. You get Jacoby Brissett, Phillip Rivers, last year Carson Wentz, now Matt Ryan. So it's hard to kind of build a connection with the offense. I get that. But there's a reason, right, that these quarterbacks are leaving, or not leaving, but not working out. And it's kind of concerning for me that this is your 3rd try with a competent quarterback. I'm going to forgive the Jacoby years, but with Rivers, he was, retiring, whatever. But Wentz last year, we'll see. He's balling out in Washington right now.
Balling out against the Detroit Lions.
They lost by a single score. And then Matt Ryan has not looked impressive at all so far. And there's key guys going down. Obviously, you'll get these guys back the remainder of the season, and Michael Pittman and Shaq Leonard. But it's a coaching thing I'm the most concerned about. Now, there's a few things going in their favor. They have the easiest schedule going forward, or 3rd easiest in the NFL, and their division is very winnable. So I do think they can turn things around. But out of these 3 teams, they're the team I'm the least afraid of in a playoff matchup. I think this is the worst of these 3 teams from anything we've seen in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, for sure, Lewis. But, a thing that does give me some hope for this team is, like you're saying, 3rd easiest schedule moving forward. We've seen them drop 2 games to some relatively bad teams.
Yeah, so what does that mean?
But realistically, historically, they've always lost in Jacksonville, right? So that's a wash in my opinion. You can't change history. If history is that they're always going to lose in Jacksonville, then that's how it's just going to be. But moving forward, I think Matt Ryan, give him some time to develop into this offense, right? Because he spent his whole career in Atlanta. So this is his first time ever being out of that system, coming into a new system. So it's going to take him some time to build some rapport with these guys, get used to a brand new system with his head coach, Frank Reich. And like you were saying, Pittman is coming back, his number 1 target, and Shaq Leonard. You talk about some of these defensive guys in the NFL who can completely change games. He's one of those guys. And so have him back on the field soon is going to be, a great addition for this team. And I really like how this season might turn out for these guys. Obviously at this point, 0-2, very, very low chances of making it into the playoffs, especially with the new competition that's come into the league. But we'll see what Matt Ryan can do once he gets fully incorporated into this offense.
Yeah, but my thing is, yes, they're going to get Pittman back, but you still had Jonathan Taylor, and you scored 0 points with the best running back in the NFL. I mean, that's inexcusable against a divisional opponent. Did you just punt the game? Oh, yeah, we're no good. Like you said, history. We're supposed to lose this game. Let's just lose it and get out of the way. I mean, that's a ridiculous take, in my opinion, for a guy in Frank Reich, who a lot of casual fans still recognize as a top half coach in the NFL. And I would argue he's probably sitting on one of the hottest seats in the NFL if he can't get it done this season with all the resources they put into Matt Ryan and put into this offense. For them to put up 0 points against a divisional opponent, being the Jaguars, who they have some talent defensively, but you can't name more than 6 players on that defense. I can't name more than 6 players, and I run an NFL podcast. So what does that tell you? So I think they do need to turn things around. But yeah, there's a lot of cause for concern.
Well, we'll see how Matt Ryan can do going later into the season. Lewis, let's move on to another 0-2 team who we had a lot of high hopes for this season, the Cincinnati Bengals. They dropped their first two games, especially this one was really surprising going up against Cooper Rush. But, one thing to note is they're playing against two really, really underrated defenses. I know the Steelers, everybody knows the Steelers, but this Cowboys defense has really come alive, right? Micah Parsons, we've come to know him as a game wrecker. He can single-handedly wreck any game, wreck any offense. And so, the Bengals, what is your concern for them, Lewis?
Is low. I don't have much concern, like you said. The biggest concern is that offensive line. But in the last time we talked about the Bengals, I said it's going to take them time to figure out their offensive line. Offensive line, you can add all these big pieces, but it's a chemistry thing. It's a passing off defensive players. It's getting adjusted to the system. It's not just put, a stud receiver on the field and watch them ball out. Because, it's not that hard of a mental position to figure out. Offensive line, it's a lot of mental. It's a lot of trusting the guy next to you. And they weren't able to connect. And like you said, they played what I would argue is the two best defensive linemen and probably players in all of football in consecutive weeks, and Micah Parsons and TJ Watt. So giving up 13 sacks in 2 weeks is atrocious, but you're not going to face those guys every week. And I think it's going to, as the season goes on, their offensive line is going to get better and better and better, which is going to improve the offense in totality. So there's not much reason for concern. The bigger concern is, I guess, the defense not really locking in and making their presence felt. It's not like the defense has been bad so far, because it took 23 points in the first one to beat them and 17 or 20 points in the last one. So that's not bad for a defense. But the quarterbacks you were playing in Cooper Rush and Mitchell Trubisky, the fact that there weren't that many turnovers to help your offense against these two lower tier quarterbacks, I think that's a big concern as well. But they'll figure things out.
Well, going forward, the Bengals have the seventh hardest strength of schedule in the NFL, Lewis. And so, they're going to be facing these top tier defenses and these top tier offenses. So putting up 17 points a game is going to be, it's not going to be good for them at all, especially when they have Super Bowl aspirations, right? Last year they were that lucky team. They weren't supposed to be there, but now we expect them to be, hammered down. We feel the situation. We know what we need to do. We've been there before. We can, let's try to do it again. And so, I'm a little bit out on this team, right? 0-2 teams don't make the playoffs according to history. And so we'll see how this offensive line can hold up throughout the season. You keep on telling me every week, Lewis, the chemistry is going to get there. The chemistry is going to get there. Well, that's what it's going to take for this team to step up to the next level, especially in that tough division and especially in that tough conference.
Yeah, you're right. Well, the entire division lost on Sunday, which is another good thing for them. And that's going to segue us, Laraib, into our cap or no cap scenario, which I believe you have a question for me.
Yes, Mr. Butler, cap or no cap, Tua is the franchise guy down in Miami.
After putting up 469 yards, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions against the Baltimore Ravens in one of the greatest comebacks you'll see, cap. Tua is not a franchise quarterback.
Interesting. Expand on that for me.
So we don't do overreactions, right? And like we just did for the Bengals, there's a lot of negatives, but a lot of people aren't ready to jump overboard just yet, me included. So why do we take the opposite side for positive things? Let me give you a little history lesson, Laraib. A question. Can you name me the last quarterback to throw for 4 touchdowns in a fourth quarter?
Tom Brady.
Sage Rosenhaus.
Oh.
Does that name mean anything to you?
No.
No, it doesn't. You know why? Because it was a flash in the pan, and the next week he threw 2 interceptions and a shutout loss. Now, do I think that's what's going to happen to Tua? No. He is benefiting from one of the best duos of receivers in terms of just game-breaking speed and just playmaking potential that I think I've ever seen in my football watching life. That might be an overreaction, but having those two just elite weapons, and if you watch the game, you can't honestly tell me that Tua he had a few really good plays, but a lot of them were just blown coverages by the Ravens. Um, Marlon Humphrey went down in this game, and they brought in this rookie cornerback. I can't remember his name, but Mike McDaniels, credit to him, he was picking on this rookie like he was like he was the best kid in your fifth grade pickup basketball game. I mean, just picking him every single play he could. He could not. They put Tyreek on him, and if Tyreek was on him, go Waddle, go, and they just could not stop it. Now, credit to it for getting the ball out, but a lot of underthrows, a lot of two interceptions, two bad decisions. They were both bad interceptions, and a lot of this game was the Ravens getting complacent, and this Dolphins team in their home stadium, or no, in Baltimore, being aggressive, and they put the foot on the gas and won the game. So I don't think people need to chill out, right? He's had his first good game in his NFL career, and it was a great game. No shade to that. He played amazing. But pump the brakes. He's not yet the franchise. Now, if he can put up a similar performance next week against the Bills and beat the Bills, then we can have a real discussion. Then I'll be a lot more open to it. But right now, I say flash in the pan.
Wow, really interesting, Lewis. And I'm kind of still in the middle of the boat right now. Like you're saying, there's still a bunch of cause for concern. But you talk about how they went up against this Baltimore Ravens team who put up 38 points and Lamar Jackson was running all over them. We saw Rashad Bateman had a crazy long touchdown. Mark Andrews went for 100 yards and a touchdown. And so for them to stack up with this Ravens offense was really impressive. And then like we were saying, like we said before, this Ravens defense, we really expected them to come out and shut down those two wide receivers. And, for the most part they did, but falling apart like that really is cause for concern for that Ravens team. And for Tua, you can't blame him for being a part of his system, right? You can't blame his coach for calling good plays and, making good designs. And so I want to see some more of that next week against the Bills, like you were saying, but he definitely has the chances of being the franchise QB.
Well, I'm saying more from a game planning perspective is there's not a lot of tape, and it's not a lot of good tape on Tua. So I feel like if he has these replicating performances, defenses will start to key in on these two guys and force Tua to make plays. And if he can, then my opinion will change. But as of now, and I've heard some wild things online, but right now, if he said, "Hey, give me my contract extension to pay me like one of the top guys," I'm not signing that. No team is signing that. Right now, I say flash in the pan, but prove me wrong, Tua. I'd love for you to, because I like Miami. I like when Miami is good because I like their jerseys. It's that simple. All right, Laura, I have a cap or no cap for you. So the Detroit Lions beat my Washington Commanders, but I did pick them, head over heart. They beat them in pretty resounding fashion. So, Laura, cap or no cap, the Lions will make the playoffs.
Well, Lewis, I really enjoy watching this Lions team week after week from last season and this season, but I have to go cap on this one. I feel like their offense with Jared Goff, it's really explosive, right? They have a lot of playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. Their offensive line, I would arguably say top 3, top 5 in the NFL for sure. Just how they can dominate that line of scrimmage, and we see Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift going for huge runs week after week. But I think what's really going to hold this defense or this team back is their defense. We saw Aiden Hutchinson have 3 sacks, but besides him, there really isn't a bright spot on that team. We saw they gave up 38 points to the Eagles last week, and then they give up, a late comeback to this Commanders team. They're still able to hold on, but I feel like it's that defense that's going to hold them back. And really, Jared Goff, he's been to a Super Bowl, but can you really trust him week after week to make big plays? A lot of teams go into Detroit or, whenever they're facing Detroit, we still think of this old adage of the Detroit Lions being one of the worst teams in the NFL. And they really, sometimes they really don't get up for the games against this team. And I feel like that's what's going to continue, week after week until they start racking up some more of these big wins. But, I think the defense is going to hold him back, and I think Jared Goff is really not a big-time guy.
Yeah, a tough out is a great way to describe this team. Big shout-out to Zachary Dugas for saying the Lions were going to win this game, and he's very high on this team. So if you're listening, Zach, appreciate the support. But a tough out is how I would describe it. This offensive line is undoubtedly one of the best, if not the best units in the NFL. And we've seen Jared Goff with good weapons and a good offensive line and a good play caller and their offense coordinator. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. I'll get it in a second. But he's done a really good job of designing great running game plays, which we saw Sean McVay was really good at when Goff had Todd Gurley in his early years in Los Angeles. So you can see a kind of a lot of this Ramsisms, if I can say that, coming with this team. But this team does not have an Aaron Donald. And I agree with you. The weakness of this team is their defense and their secondary, noticeably, as they're giving up big play after big play. A.J. Brown last week, and this week you had Jahan Dodson and Terry just carving up this defense. And shout out, I told you to start him this week. Did you?
Yes,
You
sir.
did?
Thank you. I mean,
All right,
won my
all
week
right.
because of that. So
Yeah, no big
thank you.
deal. My concern is when you go up against quarterbacks in your division and offenses like the Packers and like the Vikings, it's going to be a big test for this defense and a test that I don't think they're up to yet. Now, it's going to be a good team all year. They're going to put up a lot of offensive games. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, his ascension to one of the best wide receivers in the NFL is happening. He is such a consistent target, and I think he's going to be one of the best. He's just going to fly. I fear he's going to fly under the radar for way too long because he's in Detroit. But I want to give him the respect he deserves because he is a top 15 talent at the receiver position as we stand right now in the NFL. So I want to make sure I gave him his props. But that is all I have for the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, Lewis, but let me ask you another question. All right. After another shaky performance, do you feel that the Denver Broncos, cap or no cap, will miss the playoffs?
No cap.
Ooh.
I mean, shaky is an understatement, Laraib. So first they go into Seattle, and you could say, oh, emotional game for Russ, returning back to Seattle. The crowd was really into it, and he just couldn't find his footing. And I'll give you that. I'll give you that. And he put up good numbers in that game, and there were opportunities, obviously, in the red zone, 2 fumbles. So I wasn't ready to hop ship last week, even though there were things, and I'll get to them, that did concern me. And then we go into this most recent game against the Texans, and it was a 10-point line, and they just could not separate from this Texans team. In fact, they couldn't even get a lead against the Texans team until the fourth quarter. I mean, this was a Texans team that, played pretty poorly in their opener, and you're projected to beat them in your home stadium. And what my biggest concern for this team is their head coach, Nathaniel Hackett. He had some just mind-boggling. We talked about what he did in the Monday night game, obviously against Seattle, where he opts for a 64-yard field goal at the end of the game instead of putting the ball into his franchise quarterback's hands to pick up 5 yards for an easier chance to win that game. And then against the Texans, late in this game, they got stopped on third down, and they got to line up for like a 54-yard kick. And you're like, all right, 54 yards in Denver. Obviously, you're going to kick this. But then they had a false start. Or no, it was a delay of game. And they've had so many delay of games under Nathaniel Hackett. And you could say maybe in the first game, oh, that Seattle crowd was raucous, fan impact plays all over the place. But that was happening in Denver to where the fans were literally counting down the game clock like it was Giannis at the free throw line. I mean, this was embarrassing. And then you get a delay of game at home, pushing the kickback to the 59-yard kick, a 59-yard attempt, and Hackett decides to punt the ball. So you decide to opt for a 64-yard kick in Seattle, but then when you're in Denver and the high altitude, you opt to punt it back to the Texans. Thankfully, they won this game, but Hackett is concerning me through 2 games, and in this division against Herbert and Mahomes, and we talked about it before, but Derek Carr, I do not see this team making the playoffs, Rob.
Well, you know what else the fans were doing besides counting down was booing at the top of their lungs and holding their hands in their heads and doing exactly what Seahawks fans were doing with Russell Wilson the past season when we seen him make these boneheaded plays, right? Early in his career, you see him roll out of the pocket. We see him be a little bit more mobile. But now he likes to stand tall in that pocket, Lewis. But one thing that I can tell you about Russell Wilson, he isn't tall. He's short, trying to look over those tall offensive linemen. He's not able to move around like he once was. And now in Denver, when there's a lot of pressure on him, a lot of high expectations for this Denver team, with the head coach who's in subpar so far, it's looking really, really scary for this Broncos team. I will say their defense has been solid against Geno Smith and my boy Davis Mills, but they're going to be tested, really tested. I know Pat Surtain, he's a shoulder injury. We don't know what the outlook for him is going to be. Jerry Jeudy also goes down with a shoulder injury, and so they're starting to miss some of these key pieces one by one. Somebody's going down, and we'll see how this team can hold up. But especially in this division, like we're saying, they're all going to be cannibalizing each other. This Denver Broncos team, which had Super Bowl aspirations, might be the bottom of their division, Lewis.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's tough. Obviously, there's overreactions right now, but what I've seen from this Broncos team just gives me way too much reason to pause, to where last in the division is not a far cry. And we just talked all about the Raiders, but the Raiders, talent-wise, and they lose Jerry Jeudy to injury, and it's apparently not as serious as we think, but continuing to lose receiver depth is a big thing. And you just compare talent to talent with the Raiders, and it's a toss-up. And who's the better coach, Nathaniel Hackett or Josh McDaniels? It's choosing worse or worse. I mean, but yeah, so I don't think they'll win the division. But moving on to the NFC West, Laraib, usually when a starting quarterback gets injured, the hopes and dreams for their fans and their team plummet. However, after Trey Lance got injured in the first quarter against the Seahawks, that was quite the opposite reaction from fans and media alike. As the 49ers went on to win this game, and Jimmy Garoppolo is now their starting quarterback. Laraib, cap or no cap, the 49ers will win the NFC West.
I'm going to go no cap on this one, Lewis. All right, disregarding anything about this 49ers team, let's just not say anything about them for the moment. Let's talk about the Rams. Rams play the Falcons. They're up 28-3. Okay, fast forward to the last 30 seconds of that game. The Falcons have an opportunity to win that game with a touchdown. Okay, you look at the Cardinals, they won their game, right? But halfway through the third quarter, they had 0 points. Okay, you look at the Seahawks team, they just got trounced, as to my dismay.
Yeah, we're not talking about that.
My goddamn Seahawks just got Seahawks. Okay, but the 49ers came out and they just showed dominance, okay? And so that's what I'm expecting from this team. This division is theirs for the taking. We saw the players hyping up Jimmy Garoppolo on the sidelines, in the locker room after the game. The fans are coming into the locker room to ask for Jimmy Garoppolo's signature. Everybody in San Francisco is on Jimmy G's side, and they're ready for him to take them to the Super Bowl, or at least to, the NFC Championship. And so I think he can do that for them. He knows the system very well. Even with Elijah Mitchell out, they still have the Kyle Shanahan run scheme is always going to be great. Debo and Brandon Ayuk, we know what they can do. George Kittle hasn't played the past 2 games, so imagine him coming back into this offense. It's going to be really, really scary, Lewis, for the rest of those NFC West teams.
Yeah, you focus on kind of the other teams in the division, but I want to focus mainly on the 49ers. And there was a play in which Jimmy Garoppolo had a rushing touchdown against the 49ers, and his team was elated, hyping him up, high-fiving him, almost cherishing him, because he is a beloved teammate. And I think a lot of these teammates, it clicked for them that, okay, we're good now. We're in good hands. We're in Jimmy Garoppolo's hands, a quarterback who's brought us to the Super Bowl. And like you said, George Kittle's coming back, and he has a great connection with Jimmy G. So you just expect this offense to elevate further. And also Elijah Mitchell will be returning sometime within the next 4 weeks from his knee injury. So there's a lot of things to like about this team. Their defense played amazing against Seattle, and it seemed like Debo was having a lot more success. And I'll say this about Trey Lance. It's obviously super unfortunate that he got injured, and you wanted to kind of see his progression. We had our question marks and our overreactions last week. We thought Jimmy Garoppolo would come in eventually. We didn't think it'd be this soon under these circumstances, but you hate to see it for Trey Lance, and I really wanted to be proven wrong by I wanted him to prove me wrong and be a great quarterback that I thought I didn't think he could be, honestly. But, a lot of people were thinking he could be. So it sucks that we're in this situation. But for the 49ers fans, they shouldn't get too happy. Now, I'll say this. They're like, oh, yes, we have Jimmy now. Jimmy's battled with a lot of major injuries in his career, too. So it's not, you're not completely out of the hook. You're going to have Jimmy G for the rest of the season until he wins the Super Bowl. I mean, he has capabilities of getting injured as well. And now who's your backup quarterback? I don't know. I really don't. So, I mean, that's cause for concern. But as of now, I do think the 49ers are in a better position. And I agree with you, no cap, they will win their division. One final cap or no cap, Laraib. Joe Flacco will win the MVP this season.
A lot of our friends have been joking with us and giving us a lot of crap about Joe Flacco. Props to him. Came out and won against his Browns team. I know a lot of my friends have been hating on me, Lewis, taking clips out of proportion. But did you have anything bad about to say about Joe Flacco last week? Could you remind me?
No cap. Joe Flacco will win the MVP. That fourth quarter comeback was vintage Bazooka Joe Flacco, putting on an absolute star show. Garrett Wilson, this offense is clicking. I don't care when Zach Wilson comes back. Give me Bazooka Joe for the rest of the season so I can continue to bet against him. It was a fluke, Laraib. People are going way overboard with this. The Browns just, you saw the stupid elf in the middle of the field. The Browns browned it up, and they threw that game. My bet of the week. It was looking so good until they threw it away.
No, it was ridiculous. You go back and you watch that onside kick review, and like there's nobody there to grab the ball except for Amari Cooper. Like there's one person, everybody else decides, I'm going to block this guy, and we're going to leave Amari Cooper. We know how he plays outdoors, right? We're going to leave him by himself, lonesome, to grab the recovery. So that was just ridiculous. And then before that, a wide open bomb touchdown to Corey Davis, and so nobody's even guarding him. So that's just ridiculous by the Browns. But speaking of the Browns, Lewis, Thursday night football, we have a divisional matchup, a huge rivalry between these two teams. The Pittsburgh Steelers are traveling to Cleveland to play on that Elf field once again. Cleveland -5 in this one. Lewis, what do you have to say about this game?
It's kind of tough to gauge this game because you saw a really disappointing emotional loss for the Browns, giving up that huge lead, and then just an overall bad performance from the Pittsburgh Steelers and their game against the Patriots that we really didn't talk about, because what was there to talk about? It was just bad offense on both sides of the ball, honestly. And then no TJ Watt. You could obviously tell Mac looked very comfortable back there on a lot of plays, and they gave up a lot in the rushing game as well, which was concerning. So in this matchup against the Cleveland Browns, I need to see more from their defense against the running game, because they did not look great against that rushing attack from the Jets, especially late in that game. And I think this Browns, running, obviously their running game, 3 touchdowns for Chubb last week. He looked outstanding. Can they continue that into a short week Thursday night football game at home? I think they do, but this is a game, if you're betting, stay away from divisional games, especially AFC North divisional games, as we've seen so far, are always unpredictable, are always stay aways for me. I'm going to take the Browns in this matchup, but I would not be surprised if it goes either way.
Yeah, this is a really difficult game to predict, Lewis, but I think, like you're saying, it's going to be the Browns run game. They've been relying on it heavily, and it really, that's what should have won them the game last week, and they're going to have to continue to do that. We saw Amari Cooper. He played really well. Looks like he might have formed a connection with Jacoby Brissett, and so we'll see how they can do this Thursday night. But like you're saying, no TJ Watt for the Steelers defense, and that offense just looked putrid. Mitch Trubisky really is not that guy. Maybe, we'll see Kenny Pickett come in, and see what he can do. That would
be interesting. Now, if Kenny Pickett played, if he started in this game, I would really think about the Steelers.
Yeah, for sure, because you just talk about the offensive weapons that they have, right? The only position they're lacking is their damn QB. And so maybe he'll get an opportunity. Line. Yeah, of course, yes, offensive line, excuse me. But you're talking about the skill positions in Deontay Johnson and Najee Harris and everybody else. They're at the top of the league. But with that quarterback position, it's really going to bring them down. And I believe I can rely on Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt's legs to get it done in this one. So I like the Browns just like you. I think this is going to be a low-scoring, divisional rivalry game on Thursday night. Boring as hell. Going to need something to keep my eyes open for this one, Lewis. But
it's not like Kirk Herbstreit and Al Michaels are going to be helping.
Oh, my goodness. Can we talk about that for a moment, Lewis? that the broadcasting for that Thursday night game from last week. You talk about two of the youngest, star quarterbacks in the league, and then you got a snooze fest for the commentators. I mean, absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, Amazon has the budget of gods, and they can't go out and get, I don't know, put Pat McAfee in the booth. Do something entertaining. You're Amazon. Why Al Michaels and Kirk Herbstreit? Now, they'll figure it out. We're not too much into the sports media side of these things, but oh my God, it's Mahomes and Herbert. And you're talking about Mahomes like we've never seen him before. Mahomes is a really good quarterback. Yeah, he is. Can we talk? Oh my! All right, that's a quick tangent. But I agree. Low scoring game. I'm gonna take the Browns in this one. I'm gonna go 24-20.
I'm gonna go 21-17 Cleveland.
All right, so that will conclude our episode for today. Like we said, we were filming this the Monday before the Monday night games, so we are excited to talk about those in our next episode when we do our week 3 previews. But anything you want to say before we conclude?
No, sir. Just all our socials will be down in the links below. And one quick note, like we were saying about Trey Lance, we really don't wish injury on any sort of player. And, we're talking about some of these teams and who aren't like the greatest teams, but, we still enjoy watching football. We don't wish negatively on anybody or any team in the NFL. But with that, I think we're all good, Lewis.
Yeah, well said. I agree with you there. And we will agree to have a great rest of the week. And we will see you on Thursday. Signing out.
Peace out.